All right, this is the fourth video in our scientific method series where we're talking about graphs, choosing graphs, and some basic statistics, some basic mathematical calculations. So this video is over bar graphs. When do we want to use a bar graph? How do we make a bar graph? And how do we start to look at these and make both observations and conclusions? And what's the difference between the two? So bar graph, we said a pie graph works best when we're talking about percents of a whole. And I went ahead and put some data on. I went ahead and opened up Google Sheets and entered my data ahead of time. So I'm going to give you guys a practice problem. And if you want, you can enter that data if you want to just watch this set. So a bar graph, again, we don't want to have too many data points or it starts to get a little bit messy. So we're talking anywhere, you can do a bar graph with 3 or 4. So you could go anywhere from 3 data points to maybe like up to 10. Now, can you have more data points than that? Yes. For our purposes, it can get a little bit messy and it might be better to look at a line graph. Unless, in this case, we have different categories. So if you have multiple categories, when we look at line graphs, we're going to see it works best if you have 2 categories or a dependent and an independent variable that's changing over perhaps time. In this case, I wanted to look at the average daily garbage produced in the classrooms for English, math, science, art, social studies, life skills, foreign language. So it really doesn't work to plot this out as a line because each of these is a different category. So we've got multiple categories and we've got about the right amount. We've got 7 here. In addition, we're looking at things that are not the percentage of a whole. So the amount of garbage cans, total garbage cans we have every night could vary anywhere from 10 to 7 up to 12. So we've got some variability. So a bar graph is going to be a better choice here. All right, to create this, we're not going to go over any calculations in this video. The only thing we've talked about here is average. And don't forget, for average, what I would have done here is I would have gone into the English classroom every day after school, and I would have looked at how much of their garbage cans are full. So maybe they had a half of one and 0.6 of another. That gave me a 1.1 total. Math class, they might have had like a quarter up to 0.75%, 75% of a can. So I averaged that out over 5 days. So you add up each day and divide by 5. That's average. Hopefully that's familiar to you. All right, so I want to create my bar graph. I'm going to select my data, and I'm going to come over to my stacked 3-dot button over here. I'm going to click chart. Now, I had been working with these, and so column chart came up. Let's assume pie chart came up. So let's say this came up. You would want to come up here to chart type, and you would want to select average daily garbage. And we want to change the title. So I'm going to double click in here, maybe, or change it over here, I guess. So we're going to call this garbage production per classroom. Okay, there's my new title. Let's shrink this down a little bit. Whoops. Come on. To make it a little more readable. And you can see it creates a nice graph. On my y-axis, I have average daily garbage. On my x-axis, I have, excuse me, content area or my room. If I wanted to make this title legible, I could change the font down to 8. I think I have to do it over here. Font size, let's go down to 10. Oh, that's a little small. How about 12? And again, we can change the axes. We can change color. You can really, if you want to go in and play with this, you can change how much spacing you have, your grid lines, your ticks. So there's a lot of variability here, but for our purposes, this creates what we want. Now, I wanted to point out something else. Let's select our data again, and let's go to chart. It is also possible to create a bar graph that has the axes flipped. So here I have my coursework on the vertical and my average cans of garbage on the horizontal. And again, I would have to change my title. So we know how to do that. Sometimes this is a little bit easier to read, but it's just kind of a preference. There isn't really a right or wrong here. I'm going to resize this. Now, the whole point for putting data into tables and into graphs is so we can look at our data and we can make observations. And from those observations, we want to create conclusions, and they're not the same thing. So we talked about in the first video, we have our question or hypothesis. We come up with an experiment. We conduct the experiment and gather our data. So now I want to look at my results, and I see that life skills, and some schools call this home economics, art and science are definitely my largest, and I can come up here and see the same thing, are my largest garbage producers. Seeing that there's a difference and seeing that they're the top ones is an observation. So an observation, we're going to write in some observation, is making a noting a trend in data. I haven't thought about why yet. I just noticed that, okay, those are the biggest garbage producers. Now, what is a conclusion I could draw from that? A conclusion is a possible explanation. So if someone asks you to make an observation about a data and conclusion about a data, very different thing. The conclusion that I would draw here. So let me think about science, let me think about art, and let me think about home economics. Well, I do labs in science. I dissect things. So maybe we threw away a bunch of worms and crayfish. In life skills and home economics, sometimes we cook. And if you cook, you've got eggshells, you've got leftover boxes of food stuffs that you've used. You've got maybe extra pie crust, whatever it was you're making. And in art, I have art projects. So all three of these classes are lab-based classes. So my observation is that science, art, life skills make the most garbage. My conclusion is, I think that's because they are lab-based classes. And so they're generating more waste than things like math or English. So these both go into my conclusion section, but they're not the same thing. So you always follow an observation with a conclusion. The observation has to come first. All right, let's get you some practice on making these. So I'm going to create another data set here. Let's do the let's do a copy paste here. So when you want to copy, you select, if you right click, hit copy, come down, and you come up, right click again and go to paste, and it'll bring your categories down. So this is subject, and let's go with minutes of homework a night. Average. So we average this over 5 nights. And let's say we find out that English has 10, math has 20 minutes, science has 15 minutes, art has 0, social studies has 7 minutes, life skills has 3, and foreign language has 8. All right, go ahead and pause the video, and on your document, try to create this bar graph. And when you're done, unpause and we'll see how you did. Okay, how'd you do? Again, this is very similar to what we did in the last video with pie graphs, so not too terribly difficult. We're going to go ahead and select, and then we're going to go to chart. And we've got column chart again. And I want to change. This actually isn't a bad title, the minutes of homework per night versus subject. That actually works for us pretty well, but just for the sake of being consistent, let's come down here and change it here. Homework per subject. We'll just simplify it a little bit to homework per subject. So we've changed our title. I'm going to shrink this down just a little bit. And again, to shrink that, you just grab the bottom corner square and drag. All right, there is our homework per subject bar graph. It shows us that math has the most, followed by science. Art has very little, life skills has the second fewest. Now, what is an observation and a conclusion you can make from this? Well, our observation is that math and science have the most homework. Was your conclusion that you need more practice to do math problems and to master skills in math and science? I think that would be a good conclusion. All right, so our takeaways here are that there are certain instances that are better for bar graphs than others. If we have multiple 3 to 10 data points, and we have multiple categories, we're not talking about percent as a whole. We can do them with values on XY or YX. We can flip that. And then we talked about observations and conclusions. So it's important to know that there's a difference between the two. Okay, that's it for bar graphs. I'll see you in the next video for line graphs.